Good afternoon to the MPC 21 audience. My name is Greg Wilfert. I'll be your moderator today for Secure Mobile Payments, the latest and the greatest. I personally have been immersed in mobile payments for more than 20 years, including my stint as co-founder of a mobile communications company that had mobile billing connections to roughly 187 countries around the world. So mobile payments are near and dear to my heart. And now I am with AP Technology. Last year, we protected and processed more than $120 billion through the payment systems we created for our banks, for our government agencies, and for businesses of all sizes for which we do business. So today's talk about 5G and mobile payments is going to be a fun one. For that, we have aggregated some of the space's true experts. I'm really looking forward to that. And as part of this talk, I am going to introduce each panelist in order, and I'll ask them a question. We'll go through the panelists. At the end of that, we'll open it up for a fireside chat, a talk amongst friends, as I like to call it, regarding the 5G and mobile payments. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And guys, can you see my screen?
Nope.
Not yet. Okay. Now you can.
Yes.
Okay. So terrific. As I mentioned, this is me. And now I'm going to introduce you to Oscar Bello. And Oscar is the general manager and of Americas and Europe with Vesta. And Vesta is a very interesting company. By using machine learning, Vesta leverages, more than 25 years of transactional data to increase approvals of legitimate sales, while also eliminating chargebacks and other forms of digital fraud. Oscar, it's wonderful to have you on the MPC 21 stage.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. My first question for you is, now that mobile payments have gone mainstream globally, we're also seeing instances of fraud and account takeovers. They're all on the rise. So are today's fraud detection and prevention measures sufficient for merchants and today's wallets?
Yeah, so I mean, the easy answer is no. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the level of frauds that we've been seeing. I mean, since the pandemic started, we've seen fraud, all different types of fraud for online commerce increase anywhere from 40 to 50%. So clearly the tools are not there. The fraudsters are staying one step ahead of the fraud detection. And that's why it's important that merchants look at having a multi-layered approach to protect themselves against fraud. There is no one solution that solves everything. You need a multi-level approach. And certainly 5G and the bandwidth and the capabilities that it brings will only extend those possibilities. So we certainly see many opportunities to improve fraud, the way that or to fight fraud compared to the way we're doing it today.
Thanks, Oscar. And this is a topic we're going to definitely want to get into a little bit deeper as we go along, because there'll be a lot of folks in our audience that are looking to prevent fraud in their payment schemes. So thank you very much. Next on board, we have Deva, and he has graciously allowed me to call him Dev, as he is the Vice President of Products and Operations for NewNet, Secure Payment Transactions. Now, Dev has been on the front lines of digital payments for, again, more than 2 decades, but he's really an interesting expert. His expertise spans fintech, into e-commerce, m-commerce, payment gateways, cloud payments, cryptography, tokenization, and a lot more. You're in for a treat with talking to Dev here. So,
Hey, Greg,
Dev,
thanks.
again, it's great to have you on the stage as well. Okay. So, you know what? I'm getting some feedback here. Excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. Dev, as 5G is adopted globally, I wanted to ask you, how important is multi-tiered security? We just got into it a little bit with Oscar, but I want to talk in terms of mobile devices and for payments made on our devices. What are some of the predictions and protections about what we'll see next year and going forward? What are some of the protections that our audience should know about?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Happy to be on this panel and join this discussion. As 5G is, becoming the ubiquitous standard all around, and as it is allowing the mobile devices to become the de facto payment devices, it's becoming increasingly important that there is a multi-tiered security that is applied for payments on 5G-based mobile devices. And 5G, in fact, enables these technologies in a very big way. And for example, we will certainly discuss some more about the ways in which we could bring in multi-tiered security with tokenizations, with TLS-based sessions, with point-to-point encryption, with multi-factor authentication, so that there is going to be significant layers in terms of different tiers of security that could be brought in towards ensuring that the transaction made with these mobile devices remains secured end-to-end, and the consumers can have the peace of mind, and providers can actually feel safe about offering the service as well.
That's a great point, Dev. And a lot of times people just assume security, but they don't really know what's on the back end. And it's amazingly complex, the protections that go into place to make sure that transactions are authorized and you can keep the bad guys at bay. So thank you very much. I want to introduce you to our next panelist, and to those of you in the mobile and payment space, he's no surprise. Daniel Van Dyke is Vice President of Content and Head of Financial Services at Insider Intelligence. And Insider Intelligence is actually a really wonderful coupling between that company and also eMarketer. So with Dan on stage, you get some terrific insights. Dan has been a keynote speaker. He's presented before the Federal Reserve. He's been quoted by the likes of Fox Business News, Yahoo Finance, American Banker, Fortune, Forbes, CNN. I think you get the picture. Dan Van Dyke knows payments and he knows mobile. So Dan, thrilled to have you on our panel today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg. It's been about a year since we were talking 5G and mobile payments, and a lot has changed. So I'm excited to dig into it with you.
Well, good. Since you're so immersed in 5G, I want to talk a lot about 5G use, but what does 5G adoption really look like today? Are there still barriers to adoption? And if so, is 5G poised for that mainstream breakthrough that we've all been hearing about?
Yeah, well, it certainly is poised to break through into the mainstream, and probably sooner than you would expect as well. We actually have been looking into adoption. I think last year we opened up with a similar type of question, and I pointed to some specific barriers to adoption, namely device supply and network coverage. And we've been making a lot of real progress towards overcoming those obstacles. And my team actually at Insider Intelligence has been looking into a number of data sources. We looked at 25 to be specific, and over 75 data points, and came up with essentially a consensus estimate of 5G adoption. And so I'm excited to share a little bit of those numbers as we get into it. But just to give you a taste, in 2021, 15% of mobile phone subscribers used 5G at least once per month. So this is kind of the level where you're walking down the street and somebody you see is actually using the tech. But looking ahead, it's really going anti-gravity. So up and to the right, it's nearly 3x just in the past year. So it rose from about 6% last year. And in terms of whether we're poised for a mainstream breakthrough, we think that's about to happen in about 2024. If we define mainstream as passing the point at which there are more mobile phone subscribers using 5G than not, 58% of consumers will be using 5G by 2024. But all that said, it's still going to take a long time before we get from mainstream adoption from a technology perspective to really changing the way that mobile payments and banking experiences work. So that's a whole nother side of the discussion that I'm excited to dig into with you.
Thanks, Dan. And I wanted to include a slide for our audience that speaks to what you just mentioned, and that is, approximately 58% of mobile phone subscribers will use 5G by 2024. That's an incredible adoption, and it's jumping a little bit ahead for where I wanted to go. But this is a great question for all three of our experts on the panel right now as we talk about 5G. So I'm going to assume that not everybody listening knows what 5G is. So guys, from your different perspectives, let's jump into that for just a second and let us know what the heck is so cool about 5G. Oscar, let me start with you. And, from your perspective, and then guys jump in, but, the obvious go-to is speed. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, but not only speed, I think it's also accessibility. How many there are today, we kind of have defined the universe of where transactions can be originated, and we've got fraud prevention built around those tools. 5G just opens that up exponentially, right? You now can originate transactions from new points. It's going to create new gaps within the security system that you've got to identify. There's new, what we call device fingerprinting, that databases that have to build up. So it offers obviously speed, more bandwidth are the obvious things, but with that, along with that, also means you've opened up a fire hose as to how transactions can enter a system, all types of transactions, right? And device fingerprinting and tools that we use to identify, to validate, to make sure that those are secure transactions, obviously have to catch up to make sure that the integrity of the system remains as it is today without any further degradation when it comes to security.
Great point. And, in addition to the speed and the accessibility you mentioned, one of the boxes you always check when you're talking about 5G is latency. So Dev, as we, get into total adoption of 5G, is latency gonna help you as you build fraud prevention tools and try to make transactions more secure?
Yeah, actually, all these goes in tandem in terms of increased bandwidth, increased data rates, and then reduce latencies of the order of a millisecond. And then the ability to actually contain more number of devices. It's predicted that we could have about 54 billion devices. So that's actually a phenomenal jump in terms of the number of devices that the 5G networks will be able to handle, which means there is actually a significant opportunity that it brings in for payments. Today, when we look at it, the mobile devices are actually used for a variety of roles in payments. It is used as a wallet to make a payment. It is used as a smart mobile device to accept a payment. It is used to make person-to-person payments. It is used to make bank transfers for making transactions. It is used even for smart payments with ATM transactions. So practically, all of these activities, as more and more customers start using these devices for these various multitude payment functions, it practically would require a significant capability in the network to support these operations. And all of these will add the need to bring in the adequate level of security into these networks, and and the providers need to be prepared for that. And that is where, again, 5G is going to be a significant benefit for the service providers, which in terms of the additional bandwidth that is going to bring in, the faster networks that are going to bring in, which means that when we talk of TLS-based security, when we talk of tokenization-based data redaction mechanisms, when we talk of point-to-point encryption for end-to-end security, all of these is going to require some level of computing abilities and some level of time-consumed activities, which all could be done fairly quickly through these networks, which means that despite all the additional levels of security that is going to be brought in, the transactions could still be completed in very minimal time, which means that we will still have the benefits of the speed of the network as well as the advantages of the security that the technologies are going to bring in. So in that context, 5G is going to really make the transactions faster, but at the same time, it is going to be allowing us to provide high level of security while offering these services.
Dev, you just brought up a great point that lets me dovetail right into the consumer experience. So with the speed, with security, comes some very important aspects for merchants. One of them being reduced cart abandonment. So Dan, that's a perfect tee up for you. Is 5G slated to be all that for the merchants? Is it going to improve the merchant experience as well as the consumer experience?
I think yes, it will take some time for that to really be realized. So we're looking earlier at a chart of adoption. You have a key stat of that on this slide, showing that 15% of mobile phone subscribers were using 5G at least one time per month in 2021, and that's going to roughly 4x to about 60% by 2024. That still doesn't mean that the majority of traffic is flowing through 5G. And so we're talking about a subset of payments that will see a market benefit when it comes to the speed of transactions. I do see that having an effect on reducing cart abandonment. I think additionally, and looking a little bit further out still, thinking about the benefits of that speed when it comes to conversational commerce and other next-gen payments experiences really excite me as well. And I think there you can see the benefits of small millisecond gains in terms of speed really paying off in terms of a better experience. And a great way to bring that example to life is just to think about face-to-face speaking with somebody. The sort of latency that you get in real time in a conversation is very minimal. Whereas if you're talking to a speaker, like I have a HomePod in the background and I could go, "Hey Siri." You see, it took about like 3 seconds. Echo will do it a little bit faster. I think they have latency down to about 1.5 seconds. But in order for conversational commerce to really take off, that needs to come down further still so that you can have a real dialogue with your devices. And I think that will be a next powerful iteration that builds off of other modalities of payments. Clearly a far off use case in terms of getting into the mainstream, but one that I think will have powerful implications.
And Dan, I want to do a follow-up and then throw it back to Dev and Oscar, but I wanted to speak to what we talked about last year, and that was one of the barriers for adoption was lack of devices, right? So if you look at the bottom bullet on the slide available on your screen, I forget exactly how many devices were available last year, but I'm pretty sure it was just over 100. I want to say like 125-ish. So does the number of devices that are available to 5G users today, does that bode well? Are we progressing at a rate that you would expect? What do you
absolutely.
think? Are you bullish?
I'm very bullish in terms of devices, getting the devices into consumers' hands. So right now, you basically cannot buy a top tier phone whether it's an iPhone or Samsung, that doesn't have 5G support. All the flagships are baking in support for the technology. Over time, we expect that to go to the mid-tier phones and then further downstream still. And all that will have an effect of propelling upwards adoption in the future. And that said, the point I was making before is that all that will still have sort of a stutter effect before we begin to see that really change the way payments are implemented and delivered as traffic begins to actually flow through those devices. So whether a consumer is in an area that they have access to the 5G network, whether they're indoors and that makes it more difficult to get network coverage, all those will be barriers that have yet to be overcome. But I will say that those barriers will probably be overcome in a relatively short amount of time. So whether it's 5 years or 10 years, and if that sounds like a long amount of time, just keep in mind that Lord of the Rings actually came out 2 decades ago, which shocked me once I came across that recently on the internet. So time moves a lot faster than you expect.
Yeah, it does. And it's also a little comical as a sidebar here that I'm already hearing about 6G from the carriers. We're saying, wow, guys, I think we're getting a little bit, ahead of ourselves here. But it does open up a question that I'm going to throw at Oscar. But guys, jump in as you will. It's the white elephant in the room. All this speed, all these great features we're talking about don't mean anything unless the carriers do their part, right? So I think there is some culpability on the carriers to make sure that they provide the service as fast as they can, as reliably as they can. And Oscar, don't they also hold some accountability in terms of, supplying us with their own fraud prevention tools to make the transactions more secure?
So yes, let me go back to your first comments where you talked about the burden that the carriers have on their shoulder. Look, I can tell you that I live here in Miami, in downtown Miami, and a couple of years ago we had the Super Bowl here. In anticipation for the Super Bowl, the carriers decided that they wanted to equip downtown Miami all the way up to the stadium with 5G capabilities as a way to demonstrate it. And I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with this, but 5G requires a tower every 300 feet. I can look outside my balcony and I can see the 5G network, and there's a tower every 300 feet located throughout the city. So when you think of the challenge that these carriers have to be able to deploy 5G services, having to put a tower every 300 feet, it's quite a challenge. I mean, the sidewalks here were ripped up for weeks because to put one of these towers, it requires a sidewalk. They have to cut the sidewalk. They have to run cables. They need power because every tower needs its own power. So it's quite a challenge. It's very different than the cellular networks that we know today, where you put up a tower and it has a radio coverage. This now requires. So that in itself is a big challenge. Now, is it their responsibility to provide? Yeah, they're going to provide a layer of security, probably not much more than the security that they provide today. Remember, they're in the business of giving access to as many people as possible to their networks, and they make their money from access. The last thing they want is to be blocking any type of traffic. Ultimately, it will be up to the users that are using that network to implement the proper security on those networks to make sure that whatever their business is, it's properly secured. If I'm a merchant, what am I looking for? Well, I want to make sure that I'm not hit with fraud, any type of fraud, whether it's friendly fraud or whether it's card fraud or payment fraud. I want to try to avoid it. So it's my responsibility to find the right tools that are going to protect my business, whether it's and again, security is a difficult thing. You can implement a lot of security in your house. You can bolt down everything, but that doesn't make living very easy. Well, it's the same thing in the transaction world. You can put all these rules and regulations, but then your business will die because you won't sell anything. You won't have any fraud, so you won't sell anything. So the users of these networks, it's up to them to decide what tools, and there's many of them out there, are going to give them the highest ability to interact with their users and lower the amount of fraud And one of the most important things we look at is get rid of those false declines. A lot of businesses today, because of the fixed rules that they work with, they get a lot of false declines. And a false decline just means that you're losing a good customer. And you don't want that. So I don't think the carriers are going to do much to improve the security in terms of the transaction flowing and the fraud element using the network. The network is there. It's meant to be used by everybody. And some people are going to use it in the right way and others are not going to use it. So ultimately, every user of their network has to define what's the best security that they need and implement that security. And it'll be key because like we've talked already, the bandwidth is going to grow, the accessibility is going to grow, and it's going to increase the places where fraud can exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
I'd like to add something to it, from both the carrier perspective as well as from a payment perspective, because 5G brings one new thing into the mix, that is the 5G edge compute capability in the cloud, which is actually going to be something significant, and we believe that the carriers could actually create a vertical for payment in itself, in that 5G edge. So as the rollouts continue to happen, and as the 5G edge cloud, takes its own shape and form in a major way, this will actually provide a potential opportunity for the carriers to actually put up that payment vertical in that 5G edge cloud, which could then become a significant opportunity for the payment providers and other entities, operating in the space, to work actively, either with the operators on their own or operators, working together to actually have a transformation play in the payments. And mobile operators could find themselves actually in the thick of action because they control the consumer mobile devices which hold the wallet applications. They control probably the mobile devices which could act as smart POS devices, and they're actually offering these services and enabling these devices. So it could be an opportunity for these carriers as well as 5G gets rolled out in a big way. And on top of that, when we talk of a security, we believe that there is enough traction going on right now from the hardware security modules to get virtualized and be brought into the cloud as well, which would then enable these cloud HSMs, which could actually bring in the 5G carriers into a full-fledged service provisioning capability with these cloud HSMs as part of the 5G edge cloud, which could together then put up their infrastructure, which could actually ensure that there's going to be an additional level of security that could be brought into the carrier's 5G infrastructure as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Dev. I want to go back to you, Dan, and I'd like Oscar, you and Dev to both weigh in on this as well. I want to go back to security because it's fascinating, and I think it's going to be very interesting for our audience too, in terms of more data that's available, as well as probably the emergence to a greater degree of things like behavioral biometrics. Dan, that tees you up.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. You said it. So the ability for greater throughput allows for more information to be collected, analyzed in real time, and factor into better, whether it's false declines or false positives, getting both heading in the right direction. To Dev's point, because it's quite an interesting one, I actually wondered if I might throw it back to him really quickly. So Dev, you were bringing up that the mobile networks have an opportunity to make a real play for payments around edge computing and standing up a payments vertical. I was curious in the context of MCX, which for those who don't know, who might be listening in, was the mobile network's failed play at a mobile wallet, which relied on a consortium between the mobile networks. They had a lot of advantages at the time building out a mobile wallet. This was about a decade ago or so. And ultimately they failed because they just weren't able to move nimbly. Dev, do you think that mobile networks are better positioned to succeed with the type of payment play that you were referencing? Because that sounds really interesting to me.
It's a very good question, Dan, and thanks for you opening up that question. So in fact, you have a very huge point that trying to create individual silos by the independent operators on their own is not going to be successful, as we saw, which was the reason for the failure that happened, several years back. I guess that model has failed, and luckily today we have limited wallets driven by the operating systems of the mobile or phone manufacturers, which actually has created quite a homogeneous environment for the end users. So what can the carriers bring in is the carriers are actually good at infrastructure. Okay, they are actually good at putting that infrastructure locally within the countries. And if you look at the payment segment, several countries have very stringent domicile requirements to have infrastructure within the country. Now, this is where the 5G and the mobile carriers could actually set up this 5G cloud infrastructure and the payment verticals within that infrastructure and enable the service providers to have their infrastructure in the 5G edge cloud, whereby that will enable this high-speed compute capability of the 5G cloud and the speed requirements for the high volume that we're anticipating, with the mobile transactions touching new highs. It could all be met so that the carriers could actually focus on infrastructure, could focus on the security of infrastructure with the cloud HSM, as we just spoke. And then the service providers could actually migrate into these edge compute domains, which could actually allow them to support high volume transactions and ensure that the volume growth is actually going to be met. And also keep in mind that the security, as you just mentioned about collecting more information about the users, the patterns and behaviors could also be taken care given the high speed and the bandwidths.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating. I had never heard about this possibility. So thank you for indulging with a little bit of follow-up information. I'll give you the baton back, Greg. I didn't mean to derail your panel, but that was such a fascinating point.
Yeah, I mean, if it's okay, I'd like to. Yeah, if it's okay, I'd like to add, in addition to what Dev said, I think one of the things that these carriers can do and technology, a new type of technology that's being used is graphical link analysis. And what that does, it allows the carriers to link multiple attributes in real time to identify if there's a fraud network out there much faster. And what I mean by that is that link analysis identifies users as they move across devices or networks, and it keeps track of all of the connections through the network. So that's a type of infrastructure, as Dev was mentioning, that certainly could help in the identification of fraud attacks or of fraud networks much easier and much faster.
Great point, Oscar. And you'll notice that I forwarded to a screen on payments fraud. And for those in the audience that know fraud is there, but don't know to what extent, the first bullet point really speaks to it. Our friends at the Association for Financial Professionals put out a survey every year and found that in 2020, 74% of the organizations they surveyed were actually victims, whether it's actual or attempted payment fraud. And so, whether it's carriers, whether it's, companies like Oscar's or Dev's or AP Technology, we certainly have our work cut out for us in creating secure payments, because without those secure payments, you're not going to get the customer, I think satisfaction you want, of course, but you're not going to have any confidence. Am I right, Oscar?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to build the right tools, and we've got to put the tools in the hands of these merchants to be able to combat fraud. Look, it's clear that there are companies in the world that have employees, and those employees come to work every day with one thing, and that's to create to create fraud, right? To either break into somebody's network, to try to access payment data. There are people that are being paid to do this. So if there's people out there that are being paid to do this, merchants better be ready to pay in order to protect themselves. You've got to protect yourselves when there's such a big enemy. Fortunately, today's tools are pretty good at combating fraud. They use technology that's no longer static technology, but it's very dynamic. It learns. It's, everything has to be about machine learning, and you've got to be constantly learning. and identifying that fraud so that you can stay one step ahead of it. Otherwise, if you just blink your eye, in a second, you can have a fraud attack that can cost millions and millions of dollars. Fraud attacks no longer take days to be implemented. They can implement it in a matter of seconds. So it's important that everybody in the financial transaction industry protect themselves from this type of attack.
Well said. Well said. And that actually dovetails into a kind of a fun segment of our session as we wrap up here. And that is, you all have such wonderful perspectives from different disciplines within payments and 5G and mobile. I'm going to give you first, Oscar, a magic wand. And the purpose of that is you get to change the landscape for mobile payments however you'd like in the future. And what are you going to do with your magic wand?
You know, today there's no consequences for people that are out there committing fraud, right? They sit there all day and they commit fraud. For me, it's simple. If I had a magic wand, I would put a feature into mobile devices that as soon as somebody tried to commit a fraud, when they press that button, they will get shocked and they will get electrocuted. And that to me is something that at least there will be some momentary consequence for trying to get in and commit fraudulent activities.
I like it. I like it. Thank you, sir. All right, Dev, you're up. You've just been given a magic wand to change 5G, the mobile space and payments in any way that you see fit. What are you going to do?
I'll take this conversation, with that magic wand a little bit further in terms of, probably today about 3/4 of the population is covered with smart devices. Let's hope that, this could actually take this coverage into 100% of the population, wherein it could be the 5G mobile payments could become a huge tool for all these charities, donations, and those contributions for the needy could be actually reaching to the end users directly. And maybe that is a good value for secure mobile payments for the end consumers and for 5G as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, we talk about 5G and all the things it can do. It's wonderful, as you just said, to picture a world where the whole world benefits and in ways that we haven't even defined yet. So great use of your magic wand, Dev. Thank you, sir. All right, your batting cleanup, Dan. You've got your magic wand. Go ahead and change the world.
Thanks, Rick. So I'm pretty sure that you asked me this question about a year ago. I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure. And I probably said something about getting us closer to the future of payments and the end of the pandemic. And I've learned in that year that I'm very bad at predicting the end of pandemics. So I won't do that, but hopefully a little bit better at predicting payments trends. And so I would like to go forward about 5 years. Because at that point, I think that we'll finally get conversational commerce to the point where it's a little bit less like an IVR, sort of an annoying, scripted, very narrow interaction, and a little bit more like a high-end store associate. So asking questions, cajoling, really helping you sell in a way that feels very natural. And I think that 5G will be a key enabler of that, which will be the most important development since really mobile wallets. And I'm excited to see it.
Terrific. Well, the time we have allotted for our session here is not nearly enough to go into, all the latest and greatest and what the audience can expect for 5G in the future. But I think you guys have done a wonderful job on touching on a broad-based group of subject matter related to secure payments, 5G availability, and the benefits of 5G. So we haven't really had time to go to our audience, but I am going to make a promise to them. For those folks that have chatted in with questions, rest assured we will get those to our panel of experts, and we'll be happy to get back to you with those answers. But in the meantime, on behalf of our fantastic panelists, I want to thank Mobile Payments Conference 21. I want to thank Marla Elderman and also Shiloh, for their wonderful, wonderful conference here. And we want to wish everybody safety, and we look forward to seeing you at next year's show. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks so
Appreciate
much.
it.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.